podcast for those who suffer, which is everyone.
It's a space where we can speak honestly about what it feels like to be in desolate places without losing hope.
Welcome to In the Thicket.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Father. Hi, Aaron.
Hello.
Hello. We're so happy to have you, Father John.
Yes, we have Father John as our guest today, Father John Hodgins, and he is a hospital chaplain, and he's going to share some of his experience and wisdom with us about the work that he does, but especially this is another episode in our Euthanasia series over Lent, Father, and we are, of course, discussing Bill C-7 and some of the implications of that, and how those laws have impacted your work, to date, and how, what you think sort of moving forward, some of those changes might bring for people that you walk with. So, but before we get into all of that, how are you doing, Father? What's your week been like? How's life for you right now?
It's been a strange week in some ways, and then the usual hospital calls, but I did yesterday, and I'm still in a little bit of pain from it, but I'm very happy because I had the COVID-19 vaccination yesterday.
Oh,
Yay.
That's great, Father.
Which makes your arm hurt, and
Okay.
I'm a little achy than I usually am. I'm going to be in my 70th year, so you're always a little achy in the morning, but I was quite achy today.
Right.
And, yeah, but what they say is, and this is really important, if you have some reaction, that's good because it shows your body is adapting to the vaccination and using the antibodies or whatever they are.
Yes,
I don't know the proper term. They're
Yeah.
fighting in there, and I can feel it.
It's true. My mom had her first and second because she works in support for some long-term care homes. And the second one for her was like, the first one was like, okay, but the second one, she still worked, so it didn't knock her out. So don't be afraid. But
Right.
but it definitely, it makes you like, tired and sore and whatever, but you are exactly right. That is showing that your body is, doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
I've heard that a number of people, that the second one is the one that knocks you off your rocker.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And
That's
maybe,
so
do you want to share with us, just because it'll be interesting for some people who are listening, you are a priest of the Anglican Ordinariate. So what does that mean?
Yeah, well, it's technically the Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter.
Right.
The term Anglican, because it can be confusing for people, is not used in any of the formal documents or the books of prayer that we use.
Right.
Although we are, many of us, from an Anglican background. So I was for 30 years an Anglican priest, but when I was ordained, I'm going on 8 years ago now, I was ordained into the fullness of the Catholic Church in full communion with the Holy Father. So I am a Catholic, but I'm also married, like many of our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. They're married clergy of the Eastern Rite, but we're the only ones in the West, so far as I know, who regularly are dispensed from the vow of celibacy to be ordained. So one can be ordained, and many have been over the years, of course, in the East, and some in the West on individual cases as married people. But of course, the rest of our particular journey involves people who have been Anglicans and see themselves as bringing the Anglican tradition back into full communion with Rome. Right. So we see this as the healing of the Western schism. And so it's a very important, although we're small in numbers, it's a very important sign for the whole church that those disagreements and those problems of the past can be healed, and we can come back into full communion, which we believe is the Lord's call to us, that they all may be one.
Mm-hmm.
So that may not be too coherent for a lot of people, but that's sort of a brief statement of it. We have a number of churches in Canada of the ordinariate, and they use Anglican liturgies, which would be recognizable to anyone who knows the Anglican Book of Common Prayer and the music. We have the lovely music of the Anglican tradition, but we are the first of we think, many who will eventually come back into union with Rome.
Mm-hmm. And I have there's like a lot of people who I know who have been to some of the liturgies and said like that it's beautiful, like it's just like there's so much beauty in the music and in the the form and in the which is awesome. I have not been yet, but when
I haven't
COVID is
either.
over, I'm planning on visiting Toronto at some point. So,
Well, there is a parish in Ottawa,
oh,
and
good.
Our Lady of the Annunciation. It's a little parish, but they're very active. They have a daily mass, and they have music, obviously on Sundays.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay, I'm gonna check them out.
They're just in the West End, near Parkdale.
Oh, perfect. Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might have to have you back, Father, to get the whole fleshed out story, because that's such a cool journey and quite recent, because you said it only 8 years ago, or 8 years, did you
Yes.
say?
Well, this ordinariate is because there's one in England, of course, in the British Isles, I should say, because it's England, Scotland, and Wales, and then there's another in Australia, which includes, if you can imagine, Japan and the islands of the Southeast Pacific. So, although we're spread out very thinly, it is a group of communities which come from the term. I won't go into this for too long, but comes from the term Anglicanorum Chaetibus, which is the Latin document, which is actually a dogmatic constitution of the church. So as one young man who's very keen about this said to me, he said, that is a constitution for the ages, because it's an official document of Rome, and it'll be there in 200 years if there are any others wanting to come into communion by this path.
Yeah.
So it's quite a significant thing, and people are discovering it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Beautiful, so beautiful.
Sorry, that was an interlude. I'll turn it back over to you, Rachel.
No, that's so cool. And and I mean, our podcast is about suffering, Father, but part of the journey of suffering is healing, right? Like healing and in a spiritual sense, reconciliation, of course, with the Lord and with each other. And so that's, it's sort of in a beautiful way kind of fits into our whole ethos, I think, of what we want to talk about. But today we specifically want to kind of turn attention to your ministry and how the Lord has been working through you, to serve people who are ill and who are suffering in various ways in hospitals as a chaplain. So can you share with us, Father, how you kind of got into that ministry and what it generally looks like? What does your ministry kind of maybe day to day look like?
Well, I'm a chaplain for the Archdiocese of Toronto, and that is because when we started the little ordinariate parish, of course, there was no money. So one way that I can pay the rent and eat is to work with the Archdiocese. So they've been very generous in offering me a position as an on-call chaplain. So I'm on call, could be for any of the downtown hospitals, but normally when we're all functioning and well, my focus is on Sick Children's Hospital, and then across the street at the Princess Margaret, the Cancer Hospital, and then Toronto Western, which is a large general hospital. So I'm on call there from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 5 days a week. And then on Sunday, I'm also, of course, celebrating Mass for the chapel when it's open at the hospital, and also for the ordinariate community which is the parish of St. Thomas More, of naturally, with the English allusion. So I kind of have a foot in both worlds, and of course, I'm pushing 70 now, so I don't know how long I can maintain all that, but I do find it very fulfilling at both ends, both the parish life and the chaplaincy work.
Right. Have you found, Father, in your, so you mentioned those 3 hospitals that you know, before COVID, and now it's a bit more involved and there's some other responsibilities being shared, but what has your experience been like working with people with terminal illnesses or chronic illnesses that involve a lot of challenges and suffering and sort of thinking about dying, you know? Have you done a lot of work with people facing those kinds of circumstances?
Well, I would say it's hard to give a number, of course, but every week I am with families and anointing those who are very ill or dying. So, yes, I see it every day practically. And you really, certain things start to strike you after a while. I'm only called for Catholics, of course, because it's a sacramental ministry that we do. They have spiritual care people in every hospital, and they basically, as I like to think of it, grease the wheels for whoever is looking for spiritual direction. So if you're a Hindu, they will contact a Hindu. If you're a Catholic, they will contact me or one of the other priests. So we come in. It's good in this sense that you know what you're there for. You're there to pray with Catholics, to anoint them with the sacrament of reconciliation, to hear their confession. People often say to me, oh, well, what do you do with the last rites? Or they call me in and say, she wants the last rites. Well, sometimes the person has actually died, and we have to explain that the sacraments are for the living. And of course, you're very sympathetic with people at that time. So we have prayers for them, and I use holy water to sanctify the space. But we really encourage people, if you're sick, if you're seriously sick, or unsure, because there's somebody on call 24 hours a day, and we will anoint you, we will pray with you, we'll answer questions if you have them, and the family as well. So it's a very focused ministry in that sense. Too often we're called when the family is in distress and the patient is unconscious. So as I say to them, they say, we want the last rites. I say, well, the last rites are actually the last rites that you have, and if they're open to it, I explain that if a person has, say, Holy Communion and goes out the door of the church and is knocked over by a car and dies, they're going to, that's their last rites.
Right. Yeah.
The last rites specifically are confession, Holy Communion, and anointing with the sacrament of the sick.
Right.
And so if a person is conscious, and this, I'm very happy when this happens, we have an opportunity to have a confession. We clear the family out of the room, of course. But we have confession, and then we have Holy Communion. Currently, that's a little more problematic with the way things are, but we do. And then the anointing follows, and those are, in the church's mind, the full rites of the church. No, the person may get better, and I sometimes meet people afterwards who've recovered. So they thought that those were their last rites, but they weren't. They got better and came back. So last rites is a little confusing, because if you get better, you can have them again.
Yeah.
If you get sick again, and hopefully, people live longer, they might have them several times.
Yeah.
So that's a sort of sketchy overview of what I do, but it is very significant in the sense in which people receive these sacraments. It's a wonderful thing and I've seen it a number of times, where people are really full of faith and they accept the sacraments as the natural part of their passing, and they go in peace.
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen, of course, people who are terribly afraid, and families overly overwrought, and they call the priest at the last moment. I laugh because sometimes they see you coming down the hall. I heard one fellow talking to his friend, and as I went by with the clericals on, I heard him say, "Now that's something you don't want to see coming into your room."
Oh no! Oh
But
dear.
it is actually, for many people, it is what they want to see, and they're delighted
Yeah.
to see you and very happy that you've come. But people react in different ways. Men often run out of the room, and the women who are stronger stay and stay with the person. Not everyone. I shouldn't generalize, but you often do see how things break. People that are filled with faith continue in that faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What surprised you, Father, about these encounters? Has anything surprised you? I guess is something it stuck with you with these encounters of people in their last moments, really.
Well, I'm often surprised. I mean, maybe it's the lack of imagination that I have, but I'm often surprised what people will say to you, both good and bad. I think of one situation where there was a young fellow. He was in Sick Children's Hospital. I think he was 15, so he was just young enough to be there, and I thought he was unconscious. And I was talking to his mother, and of course we're always careful around patients because they often do hear you, even if you think they're unconscious, or they are unconscious and come back and they've heard things. So you have to be very careful. But I found that the mother wanted to talk, and she wanted to pray. She had her rosary there. She was praying the rosary regularly. And so we had some prayers, and then she told me about the long journey he'd had from the time he was 5 with these numerous surgeries. And this time it was cancer. After all the other things that he'd struggled with, it was cancer, and he was on fairly high doses of medication, and we thought he was unconscious. And when we finished talking, he just smiled and said, "Thank you." And I thought, oh, what a thing to be able to say thank you in his situation. Having gone through everything he had, he was thankful, and he had real faith. He had been praying along with us quietly. So
wow,
that totally surprised me. I practically had to hold on to the door going out.
I'm sure.
Yeah, that's so moving, Father. I mean,
it reminds me actually of Blessed Carlo Acutis, and his young guy, and dying so early, but like the faith that he had, and creating websites about Eucharistic miracles. Like if anybody's listening, then go check out Blessed Carlo Acutis. Like he's just an amazing example. But even it makes me think like because I'm sure that you've probably seen such variation in people's responses to suffering and to death, and which is like that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, is even to look at the hope that can be experienced in suffering, through Christ and through his redemption of suffering, that we can participate in that. So I'm just wondering if like what you've kind of seen of that, or how you found that kind of possibility of hope in suffering, has that made a difference to people, or where you've seen it absent, or what that's like.
Well, in the same case that I was speaking about, the mother's faith was very profound, and we talked afterwards, and she had a deep grasp of the reality that his suffering was doing something for his family and for his wider connection with the world. She didn't know what it was, but she realized that he was offering this up. And I know people often say, "Oh, don't tell me about that." there's too much pain involved, and you know, offering up your suffering is too much, but not for them. And of course, I rarely bring that up in the context, but when the mother does, or the parents do, or the patient does, then we can talk about that. We did talk about it, and in the end, she asked me to bless another rosary because she was giving it to her daughter, and the family had such strong faith in the worst circumstances. I mean, this was really the number of things that he'd gone through. I forget the number of surgeries. I think it was something like 12 that he'd undergone. So it's quite inspiring. At the same time, you sort of pray, I do anyway, that I'll have the strength to meet whatever I have to meet. And I think that's the inspiration for people. Think of another instance. There's a young, this is about a family, he looked young to me, Down syndrome man. I suppose he was in his 20s. And I had, he's now deceased, but I had a Down syndrome cousin and had always been interested in Down syndrome people. And this boy, I call him a boy from my perspective, had, as Down's people often do, numerous medical problems. But the family had been very supportive. And I realized when I got into the room, they just before he died, I guess the day before, all of the brothers and sisters and related, you know, wives and some of the older children were all there. And I realized he was the hub of the family. They all, and they would take turns holding him and stroking him. And this was just very, very powerful expression of their faith and his. He knew all the prayers. You know, he was Down syndrome, but he had a great memory for certain things. And he would repeat, of course, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and other prayers. He had a Marian, the family had a Marian devotion. So Salve Regina was said in Latin.
Wow.
And so it was very inspiring to see how this little person, he wasn't very small physically, had a tremendous spiritual connection with his family and others.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, I'm tearing up a little bit. I don't know, Erin.
No, me too.
Just listening to these couple of stories that you've shared with us, Father, because, and I think it's just striking me as I'm having that kind of emotional reaction, that we want to dismiss the places of suffering and places of challenge where we face seemingly insurmountable challenges, but it's really those places that there's this like kernel of inspiration that just cuts to the heart, and it's you recognize, even when you're hearing it like we are from in a removed context, that it's so powerful. Like there's so much, there's the reality of God's love for us, and the reality of who we really are becomes just kind of rises to the surface, in those situations in such a powerful way. And sort of caution that, there is, not to glorify suffering, but that in the midst of suffering, there are these gifts that we really can't find in other places.
Yeah. I'm wondering what that looks like in terms of, like if we're gonna talk about MAID specifically, and the presence now of, medical assistance in dying that's available to people. I'm wondering if you've seen kind of a shift of people talking about that, or like kind of how that's affected your ministry.
Well, it's quite, in a funny way, inspirational, because I remember there was a woman in one of the hospitals. Actually, it wasn't one of my regular beats. I was filling in for another chaplain, and without giving names or the name of the hospital, there was a woman she'd been told she had terminal cancer. She was a very angry person. And she was giving the nurses the runaround. Oh my gosh, I felt for those nurses. And of course, her language was not the best. And I think she was laying it on a little heavier just because I was there. She was mad at God, and she had no living relatives. She was there totally alone, and the palliative care team came into the connection, and they're, if they're not saints, they're on the way. And they made a connection with her and talked her down. She basically, and this goes back a few years before MAID, because under MAID she'd have been gone probably within days, certainly. But they encouraged her to go into palliative care, and there's a whole floor in certain hospitals for this, and to work with the team. And the thing about palliative care is their commitment to life is total. They will do anything, and they do, to maintain the level of care that's necessary and pain control. But they never, at least in my experience, and I'm fortunate that I don't, they don't contact me when they're thinking about MAID in the hospital. But the palliative care, which is the alternative, is extremely powerful. And this woman, actually, so far as I could tell, had a positive experience of the last few weeks of her life because of this team.
Wow.
And because of their commitment to do no harm, which is the first principle of care, medical and I would say all care that's being offered in the hospitals, that they are totally committed to helping this person live as long as they are given to live, and not to make or to put them through the process of having to consider, well, when will I die? How will I die? Who's going to do it? What's it going to cost? All of these things that come into the very, very problematic notions that MAID is built on. And now I see they're even in extreme cases with mental illness, able to, without even proper consent, to basically euthanize people at will. That's in the most extreme cases, but that's what seems to be happening under this current law. So the answer to MAID and to euthanasia is palliative care and hospices. And they do a wonderful, wonderful job. I've seen it time after time. They make life really meaningful for people who are dying, because we're all going to die. It's just a question of how meaningful those final days can be. And listen, if we can inoculate the entire population of the country, we can deal with people who are dying in a better way.
Yes, that is totally, yes.
I know.
Amen.
That's another contradiction that we've been talking about, some contradictions in our cultural buy-in, like we were talking about how Bell Let's Talk is a mental health awareness month, all about trying to work for suicide prevention, and that's such a huge initiative. But then we have this whole MAID thing that's saying, like, well, but if you want to die, we can make that an option. And then you're bringing up right now the vaccines and COVID, Father, and just, there's such a like, let's all stay home so we can protect our most vulnerable. This is the messaging that we're getting. And then on the other hand, but let's offer death on demand, so that it's just discombobulating. It's not. That is a word.
Yeah. Well, the devil is the father of confusion, and he's really doing a number at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's interesting even to talk about palliative care, because we spoke with the episode that is coming out. We're speaking to you now, and so this episode will already be out when people are listening. But the episode with Dr. David D'Souza, he's a palliative care physician. Like, he does that, and he talks about the fear that he's seen people experience, like the fear and the pain and the, all of those things that people cite as reasons a lot of times, like much more so than just, like I want to die because like it's often related to fear or the, not wanting to be a burden or not, or thinking that their pain can't be controlled or wanting to have control over this thing that feels so very nebulous, but he talked about how palliative care addresses all those things when it is done well,
That,
yes. So I wonder about that too, like in your experience with people, even maybe not even with those who are dying, but those who are experiencing like chronic, illness, who would now be eligible for
Mm-hmm.
MAID,
Mm-hmm.
um, what it's like, have you had any experiences of talking about those things with people, like fear and, suffering and, pain and those kind of things?
yes, yeah, I can think of a number of instances where there was he was quite young, and was a practicing Catholic, from a good family, a caring, loving family. And he wanted to discuss, why would God allow this to happen? He wasn't angry about it. I'm sure he'd had his periods of anger, but he was really trying to figure out what this could mean, because he wanted meaning in his life, I think, as much as anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so we discussed at some length the various things that lead people to give up.
Right.
I remember him saying, I'm considering, just giving up. I've had enough treatment. I don't want to come back here, meaning the hospital.
Mm.
And he was looking for reasons. And so we talked. I don't know that we concluded anything, but we had a number of several conversations about it. And as far as I know, he was from out of the city and he went back home. But as far as I know, he continued to live his life with the family. And what conclusions he came to, I'm not entirely sure. But he did. I know he received communion and he continued in his faith. And of course, we say faith. In these instances, people really have to put their faith in something other than themselves, in order to achieve some measure of comfort. And I think he did. I think he was on the way to that, as much as any of us get an opportunity to.
Yeah.
He was a very mature young man. Suffering had made him thoughtful, and it wasn't so much his faith, I must say, as the way in which he was living. He was actually living the faith, I would say. That was impressive to me. Not that we came up with any earth-shattering conclusions, but he was walking the walk of faith.
Yeah.
I've
He's
experienced
asking questions, asking hard questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but that is the time that hard questions become real, I think, like when we are facing those kinds of moments. Like, it's not just hard questions aren't no longer in your head and conceptual thoughts, like they're your everyday, and I think I was just going to say, I've had experiences with friends and family who have been, have fought cancer and major illnesses like that, and it's always been a really interesting experience to pray with them as a friend or a family member. It's like we've prayed together before, but all of a sudden it's like we're, the Lord is in front of us. Like it's just a different kind of urgency, and not just urgency. That's the wrong word. I think I want to say presence. Like there's a different kind of presence in that I've even experienced with people that I know. And so yeah, I'm just imagining how much, how much of that you must experience just because of the nature of those encounters.
Yeah. That's along
Yeah,
the questions I have too. Like, how has that changed? Like, how has that changed your heart? Like, which is a good thing for us to think about. Like when we encounter those who are profoundly suffering or whatever, like it has an effect on us as well.
Yeah.
Well, to be very honest, you know, sometimes it's really troublesome, especially with children who are dying in sick kids hospital. And it's not even so much for them, you feel, it's for the parents. Because children, being children, they accept things as they come. You know, if they're in pain, they're really in pain there. But then afterwards, you know, you often see them just laughing and joking. And once they've gotten through that stage, they're not worrying about what's down the road, as the parents often are. So those are instances where I really think people are in need of, and I'm thinking of the parents, of those who walk with them, which are often family members, but often also good friends or spiritual friends. And, you know, people want a priest for sacramental things, and of course we do more than that, but the sacraments are important in the certain stages. But in between, and I think again of palliative care and care of those who are very ill, there's that sense of, as you said, I think it was presence. What we can bring to people is a listening ear, because when they want to talk, and I'm speaking of patients and parents, when they want to talk about things of faith, they need to be listened to, not given answers necessarily, or at all. They just need really, and you've heard this many times, everyone needs to be heard. They need to be listened to. And so if it's the right time and they want to speak, and that can be a very healing moment for them, even if it doesn't change the outcome. It's an opportunity for them to express who they are.
Yeah. I'm just, we're getting near to the end of our episode with you, Father, which is such a shame, because I could ask you so many questions. I think there's so much to be learned from just what you have to share. But I am thinking about that woman you mentioned, who was very angry and you know, and then had this experience of palliative care, and what you said about the impact of the boy with Down syndrome, and just basically this question of the impact that people have on others just by being, and just by, you know, just by their lives, no matter, regardless of their achievements or what they can accomplish, things like that. Um, and yeah, I'm just thinking that woman had a meaningful, you were talking about a search for meaning, a meaningful last 2 weeks of her life, which she would have gone without, you know, if MAID was an option, let's say at that time, and she had decided to take it. And in some sense, just what a tragedy that would have been, even though I'm trying to say that we would want someone's suffering to be prolonged, but just that experience of meaningfulness, that their life matters, and a kind of peace that can come even in the midst of suffering. And we don't want people to lose those opportunities to experience that in their lives, you know? So we've been saying at the end of each of this episodes in the series, you know, if you're out there and you're listening, especially if you're Canadian, please think of what God may be calling you to do. If it's, you know, some political action of writing your MP or calling them, or just speaking to friends and family about this legislation, and telling them, you know, the importance of doing something about it if you've already done something. And then, like you said, Father, being there, being present to those in our lives who need us, who are on these very difficult journeys and paths, and are not meant to do it alone.
Yeah. I was thinking, because we talk a lot about kind of what we can do, but maybe it's also even good, like if somebody is listening to this and they're encountering profound suffering right now, just to say that it's like, it really is the suffering people around us who draw out love. Like our vocation is to love, right? I mean, this is for you, Father. Like all of the suffering people that you encounter, they draw out love. Like there is a purpose to that, you know? they draw out Christ's love for others, for them in you, and for, you know, for all of the people that you encounter. And it's the same thing with us. I mean, I'm sure we can all think of people in our lives who have suffered and who we have responded to in love. Like, there is a movement of God in that, you know. So it's not a thing to be taken lightly, or to waste, in a sense, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
Beautiful.
yeah. Okay. So the end of our episode, Father, we do something that we call God winks. And essentially they are, and so feel free, if you don't have one, Father, that's okay. You don't have to share one, but if you do, please tell us. And essentially they're experiences that we've had of the Lord just kind of breaking through our day, speaking to us in some way that we understand in our own kind of, our own context, our own lives. So maybe Erin, you can start off with your God wink.
Sure, I can go with a God link. So, it was my nephew's 5th birthday this past Thursday, and so my sister sent a picture of the cake that she made for him, because he requested a Thomas the Train cake, like a rainbow colored on the inside, but he wanted this year James, which is a red train, and so she made this cake. Anyways, and it's totally like one of those things where you see this beautiful cake online and then somebody's attempt at it and it just says nailed it, you know, but it's like anyways, so there's
Yeah.
this,
Wow.
I'll put a picture of it on social media, but it's like, it's so awesome.
It's really awesome.
The beautiful
It's
part,
train-ish.
it's trainish. Yeah, yeah. But the part that I love about that though is he doesn't even care. Like,
Yeah.
isn't that the way, like, you're talking about little kids and how they are? I'm like, he just is so, because it's red and it's like roughly in the shape, and his mom made it for him, and it's, you know, his birthday cake. So he just accepts this as a beautiful gift, even though, you
awesome.
know, the patisserie chefs among us might be cringing a little inside. So it was just like a reminder for me of like how good God is. So much with my nephew just reminds me about like my own relationship with God the Father. You know, it's like this constant filter. So that was a good thing.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a God wink, Father, that you'd like to share with us?
Well, this one goes back a few years again, but it was, I guess, 6-7 years ago that I encountered this family again at Sick Children's Hospital, a mother and father, and I was called up because they had a very sick child who was only, I guess at that point, 3 months old, and she had a very difficult heart condition that there was no treatment for. But there were experimental things being done. So the family was totally on board with the experimental things because the mother had lost 6 other children to miscarriages, all of which had this congenital condition.
Wow.
And she was determined that if anything could be done to save her little daughter and help others, you know, she was going to do it. And she's a very determined woman. Not to mention the father, who is a very successful businessman and very determined as well. At any rate, I was called in that things got turned badly. They had a connection with their parish, but things turned quite badly, and they wanted this little one, we'll call her Maria, to be baptized. So I baptized the baby, and some weeks later, she seemed to really be picking up, putting on a little weight, and so on. And this went through the summer, and the parents were there every day. And I don't think I ever went into the room when there wasn't one of them there, you know. And I kind of, you follow certain cases, you know. You can't visit everyone, but certain ones you follow. So I was following, and without making this too long, in the fall, the baby had a surgery and did not recover. And this, we were friends by this time, I would say, the parents and I, and this was a very difficult thing. But to make things worse, when the funeral was happening, are preparing. The father-in-law, father of the groom, died. So we had to have a double funeral at the church with this little tiny casket and this large casket.
Wow.
And it was kind of brutal, I must say. The only thing that saved it was the uncle was a really good musician, and he had terrific music at the funeral. But anyway, so time goes by. Christmas Day, we always have a mass at Sick Kids at 9 a.m. Not this year because,
Right.
but yeah, but every year. Who do I see there Christmas morning but this family who had no children, obviously. They'd lost all of their children, but they were there to support the other parents.
Wow.
And that was pretty good. But the kicker was they then applied for adoption. And it took some time, it's a very complicated process now. It took some time, and they weren't sure if they were going to get a baby and so on. And every year around Maria's birthday, which was in the spring, early spring, they would have a fundraiser for Sick Kids Hospital. And they got hundreds of people out at this thing. And, so they were doing that, and they're just terrific people. Anyway, the adoption came through, and what did they get? They got twins, 2.
Oh,
Wow.
that's so beautiful.
So they didn't name one after the grandfather, or it would have been the grandfather who died, but the other one was, I think they named her Anna, the mother of Maria, of course.
Yeah.
So it all it was a real God wink, double wink.
That's right.
Double week. Oh,
That's
that's
beautiful.
beautiful.
That's a beautiful
know.
story. How about
I
you,
know.
Rachel?
Just process.
It's hard to top that story.
Yeah. I'm not gonna. I'm just not gonna. But yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. My God wink. It's been an interesting week for me. I have a friend who's a close family member passed away, elderly family member, and we just kind of got into a conversation about kind of what I was mentioning before, like the impact that people can have no matter what their kind of a capacity to in quotes, contribute, I guess, to our society is. And we were just sharing, and I was thinking back to one of my grandparents who had Alzheimer's and other people that I know who kind of have dementia. And then you were saying, Erin, how suffering draws out love, just like the beauty of the fidelity of family members in those situations. And we were just reflecting on that after someone passes away who has had dementia or various forms of this kind of mental illness. You feel their absence, even though in some way you mourned the loss of their personality and their ability to communicate with you before. You feel their absence because their presence did something in your life, with your family, with your, they're being here even without their personality as it used to be, made a difference. And it just struck me just how we were having this conversation, it struck me how true that is, and I'll just give one example of that I saw when I was in my undergrad. I was volunteering at a nursing home, and there was a woman there who had dementia in her 60s, I think, or actually late 50s. She was very young, and it was like total on, like a full onset. So she had no capacity for memory. She didn't know anyone. And her husband, so she had to be in the home because of the kind of care that she needed. And her husband would be there every day. I mean, I think he had retired at this point, and he would just go every single day and spend the day with her. And she didn't even know who he was at this point because she couldn't, but he, like everyone in the nursing home, knew who they were. And even as high school students or university students, we sort of knew, because it was just so striking to see this love between these spouses that was such a, was really of the kingdom of God. Like it was a different kind of love because there was no ability to communicate between them. And and I haven't thought about that woman in a long time, but this conversation with my friend made me think of her, and just, her, whenever she passed, or will pass away, that there will be a huge absence in her husband's life, and even in that home, and the witness of that love. So
Mm.
yeah, just how we take for granted that people's lives do or don't have meaning, and they can really have much more meaning than
Yeah.
we could even imagine, I think.
Yeah.
So that's my God
Yeah.
wink.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Father. It's
Thank
nice
you,
to
Father.
see your face. And
Nice to see you. I don't see many faces at Newman Center now because they're, shut down pretty much. They aren't shut
Yeah.
down. They're still doing good things, but the doors
Yeah.
aren't always open, and I'm not there that much. But yeah, it was great to see you, Erin.
yeah, nice to
And
see
nice to
you
meet
too.
you, Father.
And Rachel, yes,
Yeah, and please, we ask all of our listeners to pray for your ministry, pray for hospital chaplaincy as a ministry, especially as we go into this new, who knows, kind of regulation time.
Yeah.
And pray for hope, and allow the Lord to use you however He wants to share that hope with everyone else. All right. God bless everybody.
All right.
See you next week.
Talk to you next week. Okay.
Bye.
God bless. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Thicket. If you like what you hear, give us a rating and hit that subscribe button. We have new episodes every Monday with more stories and honest conversations about life when the going gets rough, and the hope and humor amidst it all. We'd love for you to join our community on Instagram and Facebook at In the Thicket Podcast. While you're there, let us know how we can pray for you. God bless, and see you next week.